And hello, everyone. Welcome to the Real Estate Show on KCMX News Media 880. Pete Belcastro, Joe Brett, Alice Lima here in the house with you today on June the 1st show. And we welcome you to KCMX today. And our fella here in the middle, which is a real enjoyable treat to have, is James Dennis. He's from Rogue Valley Pump. From Grants Pass, and welcome to the show. Thanks for being here today.
Well, thanks for having me, guys. I appreciate it.
We like that kind of thing. We talk about wells a lot.
We do, because we have a lot
of
rural property fans here in Southern Oregon. It's one of the great things about living here.
It is, and we have lots of problems with wells, too, at times, right?
Yes, we do, because not all wells work. Not all areas have water, and some people have too much water.
And not all wells are equal. That's a good way to describe that, isn't it? I think. Well, first of all, thanks for being here. And you know, I've always wondered when you go out and again, when we have 400 sales of rural properties every year, and a lot of those, or 40% of our sales are from outsiders moving in here. And so we have a lot of properties, rural properties. We've seen their value decline. We've seen issues with cannabis, with water, things like that. There's wells, contamination, whatever goes on out there. I'm curious, James, tell us how busy are you guys right now here in this part of the year? Just tell us what you're working on right now that we can kind of catch up with you.
So this is definitely our busiest time of the year.
Okay.
We do real estate transactions is a small portion of our business. It's an important part of our business. But the real estate transactions being water sampling, which I'm sure we'll talk about more, and well flow tests, those 4-hour tests to see what your well actually produces.
Right.
I'm sure we'll be talking about that.
Yep.
That's about maybe 20% of our business.
Okay.
The rest of it is new installation, new construction, filtration, solar pumping, and that really ramps up in this summertime as construction starts to ramp up. The other thing people don't realize, and people always ask me why I'm busier in the summertime, is everyone's using their wells more.
Oh, yeah, sure.
So you start watering your lawn, you start doing more things outside, you start washing cars, and more things start to break. Mm-hmm. It's like if everybody was to do a cross-country road trip at the same time, a lot of more cars would break. Mm-hmm. That's what summertime is for well usage.
Mm-hmm. So it goes up and down by season. Now, a few years ago, when it was drought, we had a lot of droughts. You probably got a lot wells go dry, right? I mean,
yeah, dry is almost a misnomer. Really, what happens is production drops, and that's a sliding scale. So people who are used to having 15 gallons a minute and all their sprinkler systems are set up for 15 gallons a minute, they might have seen their well drop to 10 or 8 gallons a minute, which is enough to live on, but your sprinklers don't run anymore.
Okay.
So you might have to get someone to come in and rezone your heads or something like that. But then those people who had 1 or 2 gallon a minute wells, they might have gone down to half a gallon a minute, a quart a minute, maybe even less. And the shallower wells are more affected by those seasonal droughts.
Okay, let's talk about real estate transactions first, okay? What happens, and Alice can explain this, when you're going to buy a house, okay, and it says, you check the box and it says private well, all right? That all sends all sorts of little things through your brain because something has to change, right? Yeah. So tell us what the process is, Alice, that you go through when you buy a place with a private well.
Well, I think there's basically just 2 categories of testing. You want to have the purity test done, and we're going to talk more with James about the different categories of that, but you want to have the water looked at by a lab so that you know what the different elements are. And some people have allergies, some people are just super organic and they want to have a certain mineral content or not. And then you also want to know what the flow is. And if you're getting a mortgage, your lender cares a lot about what the flow is. You want 3 to 5 gallons a minute unless it's a brand new well, and then they want 5 gallons a minute. But really, I mean, if you're from somewhere else and you're used to lots and lots of water, you think if you don't have double-digit gallons that it's not a good well. But in Southern Oregon, 4 gallons a minute is great. I raised 2 filthy, dirty kids in the country on 4 gallons a minute with a holding tank, right? And that was fine.
Yeah, absolutely.
All right. Okay. What do I do? What's required by law? I mean, when I buy, I mean, you have to do some things right?
Required by law, as my understanding, is that the seller is required to provide 3 tests: a bacteria, a nitrate, and an arsenic test.
That the seller has to pay for,
correct?
The
seller has to pay for, the seller has to provide.
Okay.
And those are really the dangerous contaminants. Right? Bacteria, they come in 2 separate categories. They have coliform bacteria, pretty common. Pretty mild, but still something you want to treat and deal with. And then the other bacteria is E. coli, and that's the scary one that everybody kind of gets up in arms of because we hear a lot about E. coli. So those are the testings that the seller has to provide.
And now, do you do that testing?
We take the samples and deliver them to a lab.
Now, people have to remember, you can't do the sample yourself and take it to the lab, right?
And neither can the real estate agent.
Right. Nobody can do that. You can't do that. Right. Okay.
You can't do that. Right. There's too many dishonest people who would buy a bottle of Avion and fill up their bottles and take it in and say, see, hey, my water is beautifully clean. Right. So this is to protect everybody involved.
Yeah.
We take them to a lab, because a bacteria test involves Petri dishes and microscopes and lab coats, and I carry pipe wrenches, so I don't do the lab coat
but
thing.
You take the samples.
We take the samples, we put them on ice, we deliver them to the lab, and then the lab sends you the results.
A place like Nielsen does a lot of those.
Okay. But now anybody can take. I mean, you don't have to wait to sell a house or anything to have those tests done if you want, right? I mean,
you can take
a homeowner should do that.
You can take your own water, but if you're in a transaction, it has to be chain of command. The water has to be delivered in a sterile container, and it has to be delivered immediately. You can't leave it while you go to Jack in the Box for 2 hours and then take it to the lab.
Yeah.
Actually, it has to be delivered within 24 hours, as long as it stays on ice.
Sorry,
it stays on ice though.
Everybody keeps telling me within 2 hours, so maybe they just told me that.
It's 24.
24 hours is a little bit easier to do than that. So, what of those three? Do you find it in water? Do you find these bacteria and things in waters that you test?
Well, yeah, bacteria is pretty common. I went to a class recently by Filtration, specifically designed for bacteria, and they said 25% of the wells across the country have bacteria in them. I don't think we see it quite that high here. I would say more like 10 to 15%.
Okay.
And your bacteria gets introduced by the well one of two separate ways. So either it's an outside contaminant. Maybe someone worked on the well and introduced the bacteria. There's bacteria in the air, and there is a vent on your well, so sometimes it can get introduced that way.
Okay.
And then if it's not treated on a regular basis, it's just going to live in there. And then there's contaminated source. So that's where the actual source of water that's supplying your well has bacteria in it.
Okay.
And so when you take a sample and you get a positive bacteria, the next step is really, okay, what is it? Is it an artificial introduction, or do you have a bad source? And that's where normally the next step in a failed bacteria test is what we call a chlorinate and circulate, where you come out and you shock treat the well. Dump a bunch of bleach down the well, sterilize everything, then you flush all of the bleach out. So if you were to flush all the bleach out and then pull a sample immediately, 90% of the time you'd get a clean sample because you've just killed the bacteria.
Killed it,
Which is why we don't pull them immediately. Once all the chlorine is out, the well needs to sit for 5 days. And that's to allow the bacteria to regrow.
Okay.
So if you have a contaminated source, your well gets regrown.
Right.
And now you're going to want to deal with treatment or filtration or something.
Right.
If it was just an artificial introduction, bacteria is killed, bacteria is gone, nothing really to be worried about. Continue on.
Okay.
I'm curious, what happens if the property is empty and the house isn't using the water? Yeah, the water's not. Does that change the time period?
It doesn't. It does tend to change the percentage that we see of wells that have bacteria in them. Although I've gone up to wells that have been empty and not used for 10 years and turned the water on, run it for 10, 15 minutes and taken a clean sample.
Wow.
So it's always a good idea to run quite a bit of water before you take the samples, which is why if we're doing, say, the 4-hour well flow test, water samples are always pulled at the end.
Oh, gotcha.
At the end of the well flow test.
At the end of the well flow test.
Are well flow tests important? Are they really needed? It seems like it's just a waste of 4 hours of water just running away. Are they? Can you do them shorter, or is that normal?
So the 4-hour test
Pete's not a lender, by the way. You just tipped your hand on that one.
Lenders.
And he doesn't play one on TV.
Yeah. The 4-hour test is typically what is required by the lender.
The lender requires
The lender
that.
wants 4 hours. There are some lenders who will accept a 2-hour test.
Okay, all right.
And so sometimes we do those. It's pretty rare. But yes, if that's the 4-hour test, and yes, you are just kind of wasting the water and dumping it on the ground.
Okay, yeah. So,
So when you drill a well initially, do you run a 4-hour test or do you do a shorter one?
So we don't drill wells. We just do the pump service. When they drill a well, they do a test. and you can actually see it on the original drill log. It is what they call an air test. So when they get done drilling, they've got a big drill bit that's all the way at the bottom of the well, and they pump compressed air down the well. That compressed air forces the water to come out the top. It's like blowing down a straw, right?
Yeah.
Okay, and then, no, seriously. And then it dumps out of the top of the well, and they form a little trough, and then they measure it with a bucket and see how much water it makes.
That's
wow.
How to do that.
Okay,
Yeah.
and state requirement is that they do that for 1 hour.
Okay.
But you can see on the drilling report how long they did it for. And you can also see on the drilling report what level they did it at, which is an interesting thing, because if someone drills an 800-foot deep well, you may not want to put your pump 800 feet down. And some of the drillers will do an air test at 800 feet and then pull the stem up to 400 feet and do another one. Say, hey, you still have 10 gallons a minute at only 400 feet. Maybe you don't want to buy an extra 400 feet of pipe and wire and the extra big pump and everything that you might not need.
When you were talking, you talked about bacteria. There you also test for arsenic, iron, and hardness in water, calcium. Do you see a lot of that in wells generally around here, or is that not so much?
Okay, so you've got two things here. You've got your state required, seller required bacteria, nitrate, arsenic.
Right.
Nitrate's pretty uncommon. Nitrate's typically, it's an organic thing. Okay. So you're looking at, we just tested one positive the other day. I hadn't seen one in almost a year. It was a very shallow well, like 20 feet deep, in a cow pasture.
Yeah.
Okay. Right. So there was a bunch in there, and one of the things was nitrates.
Okay.
Arsenic is very spotty. So there are areas around our valley that there are quite a few arsenic wells.
There is, okay.
Yeah,
all right.
there are.
Occurring.
Yeah.
Naturally occurring arsenic. And a lot of people think that it's stuff coming from old mining, things of that. It's not. It's naturally occurring.
Naturally occurring.
Naturally occurring.
What about iron? I mean, iron in water.
So now you have, those are your 3 tests, and then they do what you call the top 30. This is something that we always recommend buyers do.
Yes. Okay.
So the buyer can opt to have a lab take a whole bunch of other things, from iron to hardness to salt, all that kind of stuff. And we see a lot of it. We see a lot of iron.
Okay.
We see a lot of hardness. We see a lot of a mineral that's called manganese. It's black.
Manganese, yeah.
Yeah, manganese is black. We see a little bit of your heavy metals. I'm working on a bid for a filtration system right now that's dealing with aluminum.
Wow.
Aluminum.
That sounds uncommon.
Those are chemicals that are around us, and maybe they're getting into water as we go along.
It's pretty uncommon.
Who knows about that? But this is what you're doing with that, because we've got a break coming up here. And,
right.
But you can remediate these things, right? And that's what
all those things can be filtered.
That's what we're going to talk about in our next segment, about how we remediate these things, because if you're going to go drill another well, you got one right there, right?
I remember studying for our real estate licenses years ago. All of this was like biology class to me when we did the well section. Like, wow, hey, I hope we don't get too deep into the chloroforms and all of that here. But no, it was and it taught me right off the top, especially living in an area that we do. You got to really have the experts on board to protect your clients and get a good transaction done.
Well, and you want to have a good well. You want to know what's in the well.
And what
don't you?
And if
do.
you're doing commercial farming, we can talk about cannabis vineyards and all that later.
Right,
they have their own, criteria for water.
They absolutely do.
Well, hey, we're talking great topic today. I love this topic. We're with James Dennis from Rogue Valley Pump, talking about wells and water and all sorts of things related to that. We got a break coming up here. Don't forget, you can check out any of our past shows at realestateshowOregon.com. There's some terrific shows there. We hope you check them out. And we are coming right back to KCMX after this. Welcome back to the Real Estate Show on KCMX News Media 880 and on YouTube at realestateshowOregon.com. Pete and Joe and Alice here today in the Real Estate Show, along with James Dennis, the fellow here in the middle from Rogue Valley Pump, who's joined us. Joey's a Grants Pass caver here, too. We got another caveman with us.
We've had some pretty good additions to our community from the cavemen.
That's
We've
right.
had some really good cavers, haven't we?
And I never had to pitch against them, so I'm good with that.
There you go.
Anyway, Rogue Valley Pump is a company that is a family-owned business. I love this story because it's your dad and your uncle, right? Or
my dad and my uncle started the business in '96, and then I was in high school then, so I worked with them then. Took some years off, did some corporate stuff. Wasn't for me. Definitely like this a lot better. Everyone's happy to see you when you're the water guy. So I enjoy that portion of it.
You bet.
And I bought in as an owner 6 years ago, and we've got 3 other full-time trucks running. So we're running 5 service rigs around the valley.
That's great.
And you're that busy. I mean, it's amazing
We are
how busy.
incredibly
you
busy.
Talk about that to being. I have a problem. You ever see when you get into what do you do with a situation when you're buying or you're even selling and you have a low, like a 1 or 2 gallon a minute well? low flowing. Can I change that? What can I do?
How do I mitigate that?
To mitigate that? Because there's a problem, right?
Yeah, and it does happen. There are parts of the valley which are just famous for having low water production, and we usually talk to the well person and find out if we can add a tank. Storage tank, those are great. They can be above ground, below ground, and James can speak to that more directly. But again, if you're getting financing, you want to check with the lender and make sure that they're going to be okay with that flow coming, being tested outside the tank versus the wellhead.
All right. How can I deal with a low flow, James? Because you can take a low flow and you have a constant what's it called? Constant pressure pump?
There are constant pressure
pumps.
What
does that mean?
Okay, so that's going to be completely separate from your low flow issues.
It's totally issues.
Totally separate.
I thought they were related, and that's totally wrong. Okay.
Constant.
I thought it sounded good.
Constant. When I don't have much, constant sounds good. And actually, that's interestingly what a holding tank does for you. So parts of the country, they have a water table where you know exactly how deep your well is going to be depending on what your elevation is. And it's just a giant lake down there and you stick a straw in it. We don't have that around here. Around here we have creeks. We have very small fissures in the rock that give you a constant flow of water.
Okay.
Some of them are large fissures, big creeks. Some of them are a trickle.
Underground. This is underground.
All underground.
Right.
It's all underground. It's what the drillers are tapping into.
Okay.
So if you have a small one, 1 gallon a minute, 2 gallon a minute, what we want to do is grab all of the water that we can. Because otherwise, you're tapping into it for an hour a day as you're using it. And then when you go to use it, there's not very much. A 1 gallon a minute shower is not a very good shower. It's not.
No.
So if we can take that 1 gallon a minute and harvest it all day long and stick it into a tank so that you can use it in larger quantities when you want it,
you need it. Okay.
then we're good to go. And I always tell people 1 gallon a minute is 1,440 gallons a day.
Yeah.
It's a lot of water.
Yeah. It is a lot of water.
What's the normal household usage?
So
do you have
the normal household usage is 100 to 140 gallons per person per day.
Per person per day.
Per person per day.
It seems to be so much to me, but
so
I guess
let's go with 150 gallons because the math is easier.
Yeah.
That means that a family of 4 uses 600 gallons
a day.
A day.
Okay.
600 gallons a day. That is technically 1 quart a minute.
Okay. All right. 1 quart a minute.
Right.
Yeah.
That's really low.
All right.
Couple with 8 kids, you get buying 1,400 gallons a day. It would be pretty close, but that would about meet that big of a family's needs.
Right. So anything above 1 gallon a minute, we are pretty comfortable with a holding tank system that you are going to be able to live on it comfortably. Okay. You're going to have to be maintaining it and keeping an eye on it, and leaks are going to be a killer. Right. You can't have a toilet that sticks on and runs. You can't have a drippy faucet. Right, all that wasting water. You're gonna have to. You can't
leave the hose on in the garden.
You can't leave the hose on in the garden. And you can't have a giant garden. I mean, you can have a garden with some drip, but you're not going to have a big green lawn.
No.
Okay, so the people who put in lawns and then find out their well's 1 gallon a minute, it's not good.
Yeah. What's the most flowing well you ever came across?
The largest well flow I've ever done is I ran 140 gallons a minute for 4 hours straight.
Here in Southern Oregon?
Yeah.
Where was that?
We got a lot of bigger wells down. It was on a golf course out off of Nelson Road in Grants Pass. Up in that,
so
North Valley area.
Does Josephine County have a different water situation than Jackson County?
Oh,
well,
good question.
Great question. And I think it's actually much more specific than that. So, for instance, in Grants Pass area, Redwood Avenue has a much different water situation than Clover Lawn.
Okay.
Really?
Oh, yeah. Redwood Avenue, you go 60, 80 feet, you get 20, 25 gallons a minute. It's crystal clear. It's beautiful. It's got a little bit of hardness in it. You go up on Clover Lawn Drive, 10 miles away, Summit Loop, you get 1 to 2 gallon a minute wells, and some of them are salt water.
Wow, really?
Really?
Oh, yeah.
That is so interesting.
Well, yeah.
So,
go ahead.
No, but that where it comes to having a realtor who knows their areas and knows their stuff, because there's people who call me and say, hey, should I pay the $250 for the top 30 test? This is where my house is. And I go, no. All of these houses are clean here. Or you're over here.
Because you know that.
Well, we know that. I've worked on that house, and that house, and everybody has nice, clean water. Everybody here has nice, clean water. Now you're over there. Yes, you should test them.
Good local knowledge.
Yeah. I would think that. Remember, Sam's Valley area in Jackson County always is a problem area.
Well, it can be.
It can be.
Yeah. We've had people with 11 gallons a minute, and then literally like 10 feet away, I measured it, they were hauling water. It was the weirdest thing.
Yeah, you missed the creek. When you drilled, you missed the creek.
Oh.
So then that's
that's how I explain it to people. You can stand right next to a creek and have your feet dry. And you move 5 feet over and your feet are wet. Well, the underground topography is very similar.
Interesting.
So by the way, we're talking today with James Dennis from Rogue Valley Pump here on the Real Estate Show. Pete and Joe and Alice here today. I love this topic, wells and water and all that kind of things. It's such an important part of living in the West and how we deal with water. I'm always curious as you've got people that get problems with systems. You fix the systems. I mean, we've all had clients. We've all had problems with the systems, right?
Right. Yeah, your well system is fairly simple. It's got some components. It's got your tanks and your pumps and your wire and your pipe, but everything has a shelf life. Submersible well pump. The pumps around here is an electric motored pump that's 100 to 500 feet underwater.
They're underwater.
That you turn on and off 5 to 50 times a day.
Yeah.
Eventually, you're going to try to turn it on one time, and it's not going to turn on, and then you call us. And with very few exceptions, we'll get you fixed the same day.
Really?
Yeah, people don't wait for water.
Submersible pumps.
What, do you scuba down there?
Get that out of there.
Swap it out? That doesn't sound like a one-day job.
You were talking about how far down you go with these pumps, right?
Right. The deepest one I've ever set was 980 feet.
Wow.
That is very deep.
Yeah, and they're hung on pipe, on 20-foot lengths of pipe. So 4 of the trucks that we own have cranes on the top of them. And it's not a big deal. You show up with the crane, you set the crane up, pull one stick out, clamp the pipe off so it doesn't fall back down the well, unscrew the stick, set it on the ground, pull the next stick up in the air. So pulling up
sticks for that 980 footer.
Yeah, 45, 47. Yeah.
All right. So what does the constant pressure pump do for me, though?
Okay. So a constant pressure pump is kind of the newest thing in pump technology.
The newest thing.
It's the newest thing in pump technology. It's been out for about 10 years, been popular for the last 5 or 6. You need the correct scenario. So it's really good on a well that makes 20 gallons a minute or more. And we do have a lot of those.
More. Okay.
Or more.
Yeah, okay.
Anywhere over maybe 15, they really come into their own. And what a constant pressure pump does is it speeds up and slows down depending on how much water you're using. Okay, so if you've got a 20 gallon a minute pump and you're in the shower, that pump's going to run really slow. It's just going to use a little bit of energy. It's going to keep your pressure right where you want it to be. But then someone flushes the toilet, right? And instead of the water
pressure goes down.
No,
right?
The pump speeds up.
Oh, okay.
The pump's going to speed up now because you're using
It's
and wanting
smart.
more water. It's smart. And they're super energy efficient, and they're really, really great.
How much are they?
Yeah, I was going to say. What,
Sorry.
How much? Are you putting those
Where do we buy one?
Alice wants one right now.
That's it. As a retrofit, you can come in and retrofit your current pump system for about $2,000. If you're starting from scratch, like you've just drilled a well, oftentimes the variable speed pump system is equally priced to, or in some cases cheaper than a traditional system. And that's because you don't have to buy the big pressure tank.
Oh, okay.
And then
you
don't have to buy there's a cost savings there. There's also some pump protection that we might typically sell you, but that's all built into this electric thing here that works on the constant pressure. And then the final thing is, and this is a little bit more, technical, but constant pressure pumps work off a 3-phase power. And so it takes the power that comes in. You don't have to have 3-phase. And this computer converts it to 3-phase. And 3-phase is so much more efficient that if your well is deep or your pump is a long ways away, we can downsize the wire we need by a couple sizes. So you can save $2,000 in wire costs. And now I can buy this drive. And so I have a constant pressure pump and it saves me all the money on wire, and they come out cheaper.
Are you seeing these put in now?
We do a lot of them.
So this is the new thing coming in.
Well, how convenient is that when you got a whole bunch of people in your house and water going everywhere and it all stays the same?
You know what that reminds me of is the ATT, the Advanced Technology Treatment septic systems, that are out there that have the new technology where they filter it out and the water comes out pure at the other end. It's the same type of new technology that is...
that people have been waiting a long time for.
You're going to see it more and more and more and more.
Yeah.
Right.
I'm
It's
sure
very
the same
exciting.
thing like this. That is exciting. That's good to know.
Yeah,
Okay.
it's cool to see. It's an old industry, and in our industry, not a lot of things change, but we are seeing some big leaps forward.
Yeah.
One of them is these variable speeds, and then the other is that solar pumps have come a long
Really?
way
I was
in
going
the
to ask
last
you
few
about
years.
those. Solar, what are they using that for? What can we use it for?
So you can use solar pump for almost anything now. depending on how you're wanting. So you can do an off-grid pump. You know, you could have an off-grid house, and you could put a solar pump in. We just did one the other day. A guy drilled a well in the middle of 40 acres, and all he wanted to do was water his cows. So why would you run electricity all the way out
to
there?
The field. Yeah,
let's just set up a post with 4 solar panels on it and have it keep this trough full.
So good.
Yeah. So
how much are those?
They're in the $8,000 to $10,000 range by the time you're done, and that's with a complete system. That's us showing up, mounting a pole, putting panels up, doing the whole thing.
And what's the cost of running all that electricity? I'll bet it's very cost effective almost.
You'd have been in this case scenario, you'd have been more cost to get electricity out to that well.
Exactly.
By far.
Yeah, what a great alternative.
Yeah.
Well, there's lots more to go. We've got a break coming up here, talking with James Dennis from Rogue Valley Pump today on the Real Estate Show. You know, pumps, well levels, you know, the levels that you go. I hear all sorts of stories about, you said there was like 50 feet or 900 feet. That's the variance that you go by.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. I've done wells as shallow as 20, and like I said, 960 or 980 is the deepest one that we've worked on.
And have you ever come across wells that are absolutely so pure you have to do nothing to them?
Oh, all the time.
Really?
Yeah. We've got a lot of wells that have no filtration on them. And
see, I wouldn't think that. I would think that you
would want something.
Doesn't the cities require that you got to have this or that in your water, right? But
if you think about what filtration does, and a lot of the modern filtration is different levels of rock and sand and gravel that the water trickles through, right? Well, it's trying to recreate nature. Right, that's why we buy spring water and these things. Those come from areas where the sand and gravel and rock is so clean that the water's picking up nothing.
It just purifies it.
It just purifies it. Well, if your sand and gravel and rock is clean that your water's going through to get to your well, it's been filtered.
Already,
Mother Earth filtered it.
Pre-filtered water.
It's filtered.
You could bottle it.
We should patent that.
And people do bottle
water.
it. Yeah. And people do have wells, and they bottle it and sell it.
The city of Ashland's water that comes to their water treatment plant down from Rita Reservoir exceeds federal standards before they touch it or do anything with it. Yeah. It's incredibly pure.
Well, we have some amazing water sources around here. Big Butte Springs, Mount Ashland. I mean, we really do have some amazing water sources. But again, it's different when you have your own well and you're at your own house. And what do you do with it? You got to know what's going on. We got a break coming up here in the Real Estate Show. One more segment to go. We're talking with James Dennis today from Rogue Valley Pump, and we're coming right back here to KCMX after this. I'm sorry, I pressed started. Welcome back to the Real Estate Show on KCMX News Media 880 and on YouTube at realestateshoworegon.com. Pete and Joe and Alice here, and the real estate folks with you today, along with James Dennis from Rogue Valley Pump, who's joined us here talking about wells. I've learned a lot today. I know our listeners, and our viewers, smart real estate consumers. We know I've learned a lot from you today. Thank you for sharing that with us. You had a good question here a minute ago.
Well, I hear a lot of old timers talk about artesians,
and
everybody's got a slightly different description of what that is. I'd love to hear what it is.
Okay, so an artesian well is a well where the water that's coming into it comes in at such a pressure, because water can be coming from down the mountains underground in these underground creeks like we talk about, that when it hits your well, it comes all the way up and just flows right out of the top. It just flows right out of the top, which sounds awesome until you have one. Now, there are parts of the country where it flows out with such pressure that you don't even need a pump. You just cap that thing and pipe it to your house, and you can take a shower. And
it's
just okay. But around here, all an artesian well wants to do is put water in all of your electrical fittings.
Oh, bummer.
Say that. I don't understand that.
So you've got your well. Your well you got to think of as basically a 6-inch piece of pipe going down into the ground.
Okay.
And within that pipe, you have another pipe, which is going to be the pipe that goes to your pump. But then you have the electricity. We got to run this electric pump.
Okay.
So you have electrical fittings and conduit and stuff that's connected to that seal on the top of the well. Well, the water from the artesian wants to go somewhere, and the path of least resistance is oftentimes up into all of your electrical equipment.
Okay.
So I'll show up in our artesian, and there'll be water pouring out of the bottom of an electrical box.
Oh, God.
Oh, wow.
Okay.
All right?
Even I know that's bad.
Yeah.
Good. Yeah.
So they need to be sealed.
Okay.
And it's not a big deal to seal them, but you typically need a professional to do it because oftentimes we'll hook up to the thing with our crane, pull it up a little bit, change the configuration of the seal so that we can hold that water in.
You want to hold the water in.
You want to hold the water in. And I think that's actually also by law, you're not allowed to let your artesian just run on the ground.
Oh, okay.
Because you might be tapped into the same creek someone else is tapped into. Okay. In fact, years ago, we did a job where someone called us with an artesian well, and we went out there and we capped the artesian well. No, you can't come out anymore. And 2 days later, their neighbor called us. Hey, my well's never artesian before, and it started artesianing. We did 5 people down that street.
Wow.
Cap a well, and the neighbor would call. Cap a well, and the neighbor would call.
Good for business.
Oh, the same creek.
Yeah, they were all in the same creek.
Wow.
That's pretty good drilling, but to
Yes,
get
it
the
is.
same get the same vein there as well.
Yep.
That's interesting there. What about you? Something else you had?
Well, we just wanted to talk about who owns the water in Oregon and registering wells or not registering wells, that whole thing. So I think there's a lot of confusion about that in the general public.
Yes, there is. There's a lot of confusion. There's consistently laws going before the Oregon State Congress or to meter wells, and that's a big question. Are they going to meter our wells? Yeah, it's a big controversy.
And that started because of maybe, I don't know if the cannabis deal started that, but that was a bill about accelerated
sure.
that.
Definitely accelerated that
Yeah.
for sure. So if you drill a new well, it has to be registered,
Right.
but you don't have to pay for the water. So you don't. That's everyone's big fear on the meters. Is that they're going to come out and charge me for the water in the ground, just like I do.
Yeah.
Everything that moves, flows, flies.
So who owns the water? Well, maybe Oregon owns the water and they're giving it to you for free, although they don't typically give things away for free, but they can tell you what to do with it. So that's an interesting question, and I don't know the technical answer to that.
I don't know
who owns the water
Well,
in
certainly,
Oregon.
The state owns it once it touches the ground.
Right.
That's why people capture rainwater. Before it touches the ground, you can do what you want with it. But if it touches the ground, it becomes owned by the state. Our surface water is owned by the state. So that's always an issue. I don't know how there's answers to those. I mean, there are, but
well, and then the older wells don't have to be registered, so you can find that out when you purchase a property.
Right. You don't have to register a well that you already have, but if you drill a new well, it has to be registered. And if you try and go in and deepen or alter a well, it has to be registered.
Well, let's talk about deepening. How do you do that? Like in a dry year, did you guys go out and help people?
You call a driller.
You call the driller.
And then once the well is deepened, you call me, and I come and get you the correct pump that you need for the deeper well. Yeah. So that's what the drillers do.
Yep, I think that's makes a lot of sense. What about holding tanks? Should I have holding tanks around? Do people need more of these around, or also, what's the biggest problem you see?
Okay.
I mean, what's the biggest number one thing you guys are called for?
The biggest number one thing I'm called for is I woke up in the morning and I turned on my faucet and nothing came out.
Pump has stopped working.
The
well has stopped working. Number one
thing, and that's our number one priority. So everybody else gets pushed. The next thing we get called for is probably real estate testing, doing these well flow tests, real estate testing, and then probably filtration is getting more water quality issues. Okay. And I'm always going to recommend people get the professional testing, pay for your local lab, your Nielsen in Medford.
It's worth it.
The Grants Pass lab is great.
They're great.
It really
It's really worth it. And then once you get that test, you can bring it to a professional like myself, and we can look at it and say, this is the filtration system you need.
Once you look at what's in the water, then you determine the types of system that's going to work for you.
Absolutely. Because filtration is chemistry. So you can tell me, I have this amount of iron, but I can't remove it unless your pH is between here and there. So we have to look at that full gamut to tell what's there and what can be done.
And I know you talked about systems, and I know you do irrigation systems. Are these new technology systems too that are efficient with water? Or tell me what you're doing with those.
So irrigation systems is typically that you have water rights. You live on a creek or on the river, and we put a pump in that then you can run all your sprinklers from.
You're running that type of thing.
That type of irrigation.
You may have TID water or irrigation water, GPID or something.
GPID,
you're
irrigation.
The pumps that way.
Yep.
How often do people test their irrigation water from a ditch? Does that happen?
I don't know that I've ever been asked to touch the water.
I
from
know
a ditch.
people at Grants Pass who won't use Grants Pass Irrigation District water because it mucks up their
the seeds.
Yeah.
Everyone's worried about the seeds, right? Because
Yeah.
if seeds come in, they get in the water, then you're spraying it around.
Yeah.
So then everybody's using their well water to water their lawns.
Yes,
Oh,
exactly.
because it's an open ditch.
Yeah.
Is that what you're talking
Exactly
about?
what
It's
they're
the
doing.
open
exactly
ditch
it.
system.
Or it's the
happens.
Rogue River, and
Yeah.
that kind of comes back to something that I think is important for people to understand, which is whoever owns the water, it's all of our water, right?
Yes.
So that whole scenario where I plug this person's well and then the next person, the next
Yeah.
person, the next person. Well, if that guy puts in a 50-acre lawn and decides he's going to water it all from his well, it's going to affect all of his neighbors downstream. And so I think we all need to be conscious about what we're doing with well water, how we're using well water, and what our other options and alternatives are.
And remember,
So-
go ahead.
Oh,
I was gonna
sorry.
say,
Have you noticed any difference in the water table or people having problems because of the additional farming with cannabis, more vineyards, more cattle, that sort of thing?
Yes. Yeah, absolutely. And it's all underground, so it's hard to tell. But yes, whether it be the drought, whether it be climate change, or whether it be all the increase, I think it's a combination of the three. But yes, wells that are getting drilled new are being deeper, and
going
wells
deeper.
that used to produce well are slowly dropping off.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What is that? I wonder if that portends anything.
And we're going to grow more in our area.
Wise water use.
Yeah.
Let's face it, wise water
good
use.
neighbors.
We need to be good neighbors to each other, because this is a resource that is finite. And look at when we have a great water year like this year, everybody's happy.
Yeah.
Yes.
Seriously, everybody's in a good mood because we have a lot of water. The lakes are full. Wildlife is water for wildlife people. Everything, and that makes everybody happy. Well, look, James, thank you for coming down and visiting with us. I learned a lot today. And how can people get a hold of you? It was RogueValleyPump.com, I think, was the web address. So it's pretty easy.
RogueValleyPump.com. If you wake up in the morning and your faucet's not flowing, the best way to get a hold of us is to call. That's 541-474-7877. My dad, Dave, will answer the phone.
Yeah.
We'll get someone out there to fix you up. And just go from there.
Yeah, you don't want to wake up in the morning.
And you'll get top priority.
And
will
the
get
water's
out of
not,
water.
water's not working.
We will
water's
get
not
your
flowing.
water running again.
Yeah, water's not flowing. We're in trouble.
And
right?
you got a few years of experience answering the phone there, it sounds like. I bet that business gets taken care of pretty well.
Oh, yeah. Yes, it does.
Well, look, with thousands of wells, you can imagine how busy you can actually be.
Yeah.
And
Gosh,
keep up with them, maintain them, and everything will be
Yeah,
good.
no vacation till when?
October.
Take a good one then.
I will.
All right. Hey, that's going to do it for the Real Estate Show today. Thank you for being with us. We'll be back next week with another show. In the meantime, have a great week, and God bless you all.